everyone, it's Nat here from the Nextweek community, and today we are going live with an amazing finale of a series. My goodness, are you ready? Oh my gosh, it's the finale. So this finale is wrapping up a whole series on building a RAG chatbot with Amazon Bedrock. Now, if you're completely new to Amazon Bedrock, you're completely new to RAG, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm at a finale. Just know you can still do this entire project from scratch without doing the first 3 parts of this series. It's more that this series really wraps up everything that you learn across parts 1 to 3 while still starting from scratch. So if you're new here, just know that you're still super welcome. Please come and check out this project too. Otherwise, if you're here after having done parts 1 to 3 of this series, you're gonna love this part. In this part, we're gonna bring together all of the learnings from part 1, where you learn how to even set up a RAG chatbot with Bedrock. Part 2, where you learn how to interact with that chatbot using commands instead of clicks on the console. And in part 3, you learned how to make your chatbot accessible to other applications by creating an API. Now, this finale is about creating a web app for your RAG chatbot to tie together what you've learned around, so we know how to create the chatbot, we know how to interact with it with commands, we know how to make it accessible, so let's create a web app that actually uses this API to make your chatbot useful in a live web app. This is what you're going to be launching by the end of this project. So as you can see, we have a web app here that showcases your Nextweek projects. And let's say this RAG chatbot has been trained on all of the documentation that's inside this web app. Okay, so you have your web app that you're displaying here, and you're going to have a funky little unique chat bot here that says chat with my projects. And then you can chat with your projects. Let's chat and say, let's just start by saying hello. Hello, I'm ready to help. What's your question? Let's say someone is viewing your portfolio and they say, what is Nextweek? My Nextweek projects. So you would ask, what's Nextweek as a question? Oh, there you go. Nextweek is an organization, etc. What projects are in this portfolio? Ooh, I wonder what's gonna say. The projects in this portfolio include building an AI workflow, deploying a backend with Kubernetes, and building a 3-tier web app. Pretty cool. Now, it even has the ability to let you talk directly with an AI model, so you can even chat and ask general questions. So let's say you have a general question that's not even about this documentation. It's about, why is the sky blue? Then somehow, because you've ticked this checkbox, it would be able to still answer general questions like, why is the sky blue? Let's see if it does it. Ooh, okay. Oh, I know exactly why. We have something that's saved for the secret mission. So by default, this doesn't work. By default, it doesn't work. But by doing the secret mission later, you're going to be able to unlock the ability for it to even answer general questions like, why is the sky blue? So let's give this a go. I hope you're really excited. I can't wait for all of you to be deploying your own web apps with a chatbot inside. So this is going to be fun. Okay. So overall, something important to know is, creating a web app is really, really fun because now you have a very, very sleek and easy and beautiful way to chat with your chatbot. Type your message in the chat box, hit enter, your chatbot will now respond. But it's also not just about having a really nice interface, a really nice front end. Building a web app is also about making that chatbot accessible, scalable, and truly user-friendly. What if you have users that don't know how to directly query an API? What if you have users that don't have access to AWS, but still want to be able to ask your chatbot questions? Putting together a web app is an excellent way to do that. Cool. Yeah, so this is kind of like what we ran just now. Pretty cool, eh? Just some more reassurance that you don't need to do the previous projects of this series to start this one. You'll still get step-by-step guidance. It's just that doing the first few projects will help you build a much stronger understanding of key parts of the app today, like the chatbot, the API. Okay. And a big shout out to everyone here. We got Marzena, oof, and we got Ariana. Thanks so much for joining. And we got Strange Evil. Whoa, looking cool. All right, so in this project, how we're going to create this web app is we're going to start by setting up the chatbot, and then we're going to clone some existing code that helps us with building a web app. And then we're going to go from GitHub, clone that code down. It's going to come with some main files that creates the web app. And then we're going to run and test the web app. Okay, running and testing ends up being a big part of today's project. We're going to test, does this work? Does this cog, the API, work? Okay, if it works, can it actually connect to our chatbot? Okay, it connects to our chatbot. Can it connect to the front end? Okay, it connects to the front end. Then can the front end, can we load it properly? We're going to do a bunch of tests to just make sure that each of these connections, these arrows, are working well. Because you really need all of these arrows, doof, 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 doof as well, all of these arrows to function in order for you to actually, or the user, to actually get to answers, get answers for your questions and have those questions passed back to you. You really need these arrows to be functioning correctly. And then for our secret mission, we're also going to be designing our own front end. So aside from just, pulling and running an existing front end code, you're going to learn how you can actually create your own and customize it to make it even more, this is like Marzena's portfolio. This is Ariana's portfolio. I hope you have fun with this. Okay. Now, we have a good explanation of RAG. So if you're new to RAG, just know that RAG is about chatting with a chatbot that has already been trained on your documentation. You are really, really customizing the experience of having an AI model when you use RAG. Let's say you ask ChatGPT, hey, what projects have I done? ChatGPT is going to have no idea. It's going to say, I'm not too sure which projects you're referring to. It's been trained on data that's available in the internet in the world. It's not trained on your documents. So it wouldn't really know what projects you've done. But a RAG chatbot has been trained on your documentation. So let's say you tell your RAG chatbot, hey, breathe in and absorb all of this documentation that I've created in the past. Now you're going to become an expert on my documentation. And afterwards, this RAG chatbot will be able to answer those questions. What projects have I done? So on and so forth. It's exactly what we tested just here, actually. What projects are in this portfolio? It could answer. Okay. So how does a web app with a RAG chatbot work? So this is a bit of more of a concept and theory before we jump into the hands-on part. If you're new to web apps, just know that web apps are made of 3 layers. The first layer is like the data layer. If you want, you can also go reverse. You can say first layer is the front end, and then second layer is the back end, the third layer is data. But in today's project, we're just going to go in the order of data first, because that's going to be the order where we're building our web app as well. Okay, so first layer is the data. The data is the information that your web app needs. For our chatbot, what data does it need? It needs the knowledge that you're giving it so that it can become an expert on your information. So for my example, we're going to give it lots of information on documentation and project documentation that we've done before, so it becomes an expert on that documentation. This is data you need to give it. So that's the reason why we're setting up that data first in layer 1. Okay, it's going to be this part of the project. And then we got the backend. The backend of a web app handles the processing and the logic. For our RAG chatbot, the backend is the part that actually passes your message. So when the user types in a message, the backend is the part of the web app, the code, that grabs your message and actually goes over to Bedrock and goes over to the chatbot that's been trained on your documents to say, hey, can you answer this question based on all of the data that you know? And then the chatbot's brain, or technically, the knowledge base that we're going to create, the knowledge base or the data layer is going to say, oh yeah, let me go through the data. Here's your answer. And then the backend is going to be responsible for grabbing that answer, walking back, and then passing that answer back to you. And that's the reason why you can even see a response. Okay, so the backend here in our web app is really a messenger to be able to grab your questions, give it to the AI knowledge base. The knowledge base writes the answer, and then gives it back to you, gives it back to the backend, and then the backend passes that to you, the user. Then finally, we have the front end, which is what you see and interact with. So for our RAG chatbot, this is the chat interface that we see right here. So the reason why everything looks nice and pretty, you can see a chat modal, you can see a certain kind of font, or a certain kind of font size, or the reason why there's like an X here, and you can even check on checkboxes. Like this very visual experience is all thanks to our front end. So as you can see, all 3 layers are so important. You know, you miss any of these layers, our chatbot and our web app is not going to be the same. Cool. So in terms of our steps for this project, we got like a 3-part kind of project today. Part 1 is actually setting up the app's data. Part 2 is making sure that the backend is working correctly. Part 3 is making sure that the front end is working correctly. So that's the reason why this whole diagram goes from like left to right this way. Okay, and as you can see, most of our steps is going to be on the backend side of things, because that's really the core of our web app. You know, this backend is responsible for connecting with the data and then connecting with the front end. So it's really that middleman, and to sort out both connections requires a bit of detail, and that's the reason why we're going to spend most of our time here today. But once that connection is complete, then we can connect the app's front end to the back end, and then that's what we're going to be doing in step 5, which is the last step of this project. And yeah, step 5 is the moment where you are going to refresh your tab, and you're going to see this on your tab yourself, which is pretty freaking cool. Cool. So if you're ready to get started, let's get into it today. We got a big project coming up. I'm really excited to be doing this with all of you. And if you have any questions, please add it to the chat. If you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling excited about this, let me know. And yeah, let's get into it. So good to have everyone here. Hi. All right. So in this project, we will demonstrate how to build a web app for our RAG chatbot. We're doing this project to learn how to not only create AI tools or resources like a chatbot, like a RAG chatbot, but also integrate those tools into web apps that users can use. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really a end-to-end experience here. Like, we create the AI tool, we figure out how we can put that in the app, we run the app, we test the app, we use the app. Super fun. Okay. All right, so now that it's done, we're ready to now start creating our knowledge base. To set up the RAG chatbot, we need to set up the information that it needs to know. That's where Amazon S3 comes in. It's going to be the home for all of the documents and information that your chatbot is learning from. Okay, so we got our awesome S3 bucket here that's going to be storing all of the documents that your chatbot needs to know. Then once it absorbs all of that information, then you can set up a knowledge base that's designed to process what you put in your bucket. So S3 stores, the knowledge base processes. Okay, that's the reason why we need both. You can't just have one, because if you only have the S3 bucket, your chatbot wouldn't be able to process and understand and break down all that information, which is really important for your chatbot to be able to generate meaningful responses and meaningful results when you ask a question. And if you don't have your knowledge base, then you can store all your information in S3, but it's just going to be stored in an S3 bucket and not actually used in a chatbot. Okay, the knowledge base is really there to be able to process that information and then actually make it usable via a chatbot. Yeah, so let's see how this flow is going to work by jumping into S3, storing those documents, and then creating the knowledge base. In this step, we're setting up the data layer of our web app. Woo, let's go. This requires storing our documents in a, what is it called? In an S3 bucket. And then creating a knowledge base in Bedrock. The S3 bucket, I actually will say the knowledge base will process the documents to extract insights when we ask a question. Okay, excellent stuff. Now, if you've done the previous projects in this series, you might be very familiar already with how to set up a knowledge base. Okay, parts 1 to 3, we were doing the exact same thing. Store the documents in S3, set up the knowledge base in Bedrock. So if this is your 4th time doing this, challenge yourself. Try set up your chatbot's knowledge base by yourself. But if you'd like, if you prefer, let's go through it step by step. Okay, so if you want to challenge yourself to do it by yourself, here's a challenge brief. You know, here are some tips on what you can. Here are some tips and some reminders on how to do it, and here's a little checklist to just make sure you've done everything correctly. Okay. Now, you don't have to do this challenge, and knowing that if this is your first time, you know, doing this project, doing this series, you're going to want to do it step by step. So let's go through it step by step together. Or otherwise, you can always pause this video and challenge it yourself, yeah? Awesome. Let's do it. Now, setting up a working knowledge base is also a 3-step process within itself. First, we're going to set up the S3 bucket, and then we're going to store the training materials inside. And then we're going to go into Amazon Bedrock, create the knowledge base, and then the last part is to sync our knowledge base with our S3 bucket. So it's almost like we're splitting up this little diagram into 3 little parts. So we got, you know, mini part 1, set up the bucket, put the documents inside. Part 2 of this step, create the knowledge base. And part 3 of this step, sync what you have going on here. Sync it so that when you sync, all of these documents get put inside, get processed through this knowledge base. So that's the game plan. And let's do the first part now. Let's create the S3 bucket. So once you've logged into your AWS Management Console, okay, make sure you're logged in over here. We're going to head into the S3 service. So let's click into S3 like this. Okay, and now that we're in S3, you're ready to create a bucket. Now, make sure that you're in the Ohio region here. We do not want to be in any other region today. Doesn't matter what is your usual region. We're all going to go for Ohio because Ohio has all of the AWS services and features that we need to complete this project. Do not, I'm adding like a hot recommendation here. Is to not use other regions because you're likely to run into like the, oh, why don't I have this service, or why don't I have this button kind of question, because other regions are less likely to have all of the features we need today. And also, before I forget, make sure that you're logged in as your IAM admin user and not the root user. If you're using your AWS account's root user, you're going to run into errors by the end of this step because root users cannot actually create knowledge bases for security reasons. Only admin or IAM users can. So heads up, make sure you're logged in as an IAM admin user. Okay, so we're going to create the bucket now. And the bucket can have like a unique name. Let's do, whoa, not like this one. I want this name. Oh, I just realized I should probably put this in a separate tab so we can all follow along like this. Okay, so let's put in a unique name for the bucket like this. Next we'll rag documentation, and for the bucket name, I have little angle brackets that says your initials. I think this should be acceptable as a bucket name. Ooh, maybe not. I would say, I'll just put mine as initials, but this is your time to put in your actual initials here. Okay, and then we're gonna just keep all of the default settings for our S3 bucket and create it right away. Yeah? So let's create it. Oops. Okay, and our bucket should be created now. Nice. Okay, so we have the bucket. Great. So this bucket is like a storage folder. Okay, we can use it to store all the documents that we want our chatbot to know. In our case, you can download this zip file with 10 documents inside to upload into here. And once you upload these 10 documents, you're pretty much saying, all right, later on, my chatbot is going to become an expert on these 10 documents and the information inside those documents. If you don't want to do that, if you want your chatbot to be an expert in your own personal documents, you can skip downloading the zip file, but upload your own documents, upload at least about 10 documents so that your chatbot becomes an expert on the things you want it to know. So yeah, up to you. We're just going to download the zip file for our case, and then we're going to upload all of the documents in here. So once you've opened your bucket, you can select upload, add your files, and I think I have a copy of this here. Yeah, there you go. So this is what the zip file is going to look like once you've downloaded it. So perfectly, we have 10 documents, and that's a loud truck. Perfectly, we have 10 documents, and you can see that these 10 documents are truly documentation of existing Nextweek projects. So have fun and shop around. If these projects are new to you, they're very, very fun. And I hope you get to try one of these after this project too. Okay, so you can see that there are 10 different projects in here, and we're just gonna upload all of them. Okay, I'm gonna select upload and put all of them into our bucket. Wow, perfect match for this screenshot and what's on my screen. Your files will take a few minutes to upload into your S3 bucket. So in the meantime, we can do some of these other steps, which is to create the knowledge base. All right. Let's go into our Bedrock console in a new tab and open up Amazon Bedrock. Nice. Welcome to Amazon Bedrock. Now, Amazon Bedrock is like an AWS service that lets you use AI models to build Gen AI applications. In our case, we're building a Gen AI application, a chatbot that generates chat responses as a Gen AI application. And Amazon Bedrock, their key thing really is that you use it to access different kinds of AI models. So you almost think about, you go into the Bedrock as your marketplace and you say, hey Bedrock, can you give me access to this model? I want to use this open AI model for this app. Oh, also I actually want access to like Anthropic's model. Oh, also I want access to like Meta's Llama model. You want access to lots of models, Bedrock is the place to go because it is like the central marketplace to get you access to all different kinds of models. What do developers usually have to do outside of Bedrock? Usually, developers would have to go into every single service, separately create an account, separately create access keys to the models that they want to use, and that takes a bit of time and admin to manage. Bedrock is about putting all of these different AI model providers into one central place, so you have easy access to all of this entire range. Yeah, and it's also very, very well connected to other AWS services. So in our example, it's going to be very, very easy for us to set up a chatbot that's connected to the documents in our S3 bucket because we have this tool that's already well connected to the AI models in Bedrock and then also connected to the S3 bucket. So yeah, pretty fun, eh? I love Bedrock. I love Bedrock. Okay, so like I hinted just now, we're going to be creating that knowledge base now. So let's go into knowledge bases from the left-hand navigation panel. And let's create our knowledge base. Okay, I know I have some existing here, but let's just ignore them. And let's create a new one. We're going to create a knowledge base with vector store. And if you've done the previous projects in this series, you might know by now that a vector store is about storing the information in a way that understands your semantic concepts. So the meaning of the words in the text. For example, if you were to not use vector store and just use the classic keyword store, a regular search like quick breakfast ideas is only going to give you results that literally say quick breakfast ideas in the results. We're using a vector store, which is a slightly different way of storing information. Instead of just finding quick breakfast ideas in the search results, a vector store will also say, hold on, but what does the word quick breakfast ideas actually mean? Are there other pieces of text in the documentation, in the information you gave me, that kind of has the same kind of meaning? Oh, you do. There's like another piece of information or another recipe that says 5-minute morning meals. That sounds like a quick breakfast idea. Let me give you that search result too. So a vector store is great for a chatbot because a chatbot really needs to understand the semantic meaning of all of the information in your documentation, in the documents that you've uploaded, so that it can give you like a good amount of insight instead of just saying, oh yeah, here is all the information that directly quotes and references like the words in your question. Cool. Now, our knowledge base name can be something simple. Okay, names are not too important, okay, in this project. As a heads up, IDs are more important, so you don't have to overthink what the name of your knowledge base is going to be. We're all just deleting everything at the end. So put in any name. I'm just going to make mine that I'm going to just use one that matches the name of my bucket. And then we're going to just add a little description so that if you ever see this again, it reminds you, this knowledge base stores all the documentation at Nextwork. Now, if you want to know more about these options that we're choosing today, I'd highly recommend checking out the first part of today's project. But I'm just going to speed through the setting up of the knowledge base because the meat of today's project is about the web app, and we've done the data layer a few times before. So we're going to make this a bit more concise and then spend a bit more time on the actual web app and the web app connections. Cool. And again, like if you're like, hey, but I really want like a step-by-step guide and explanation for every single part here, if that's you, I'd highly recommend checking out part 1 of this series where we do exactly that. And the entire project is just about the creating of the knowledge base. Okay, so let's find our bucket now. Oh, goodness me. Is it here? We're going to find our bucket. Aha, I found it. It's the one with dash initials at the end. Choose it. And we're now connecting our knowledge base with our bucket. Cool. Next up, let's pick our embeddings model. And then we're going to just keep the default settings for the vector database. So another service called OpenSearch Serverless is going to become the database that stores all of the information once your knowledge base has processed it. Remember how we had an arrow from the S3 bucket to our knowledge base in our diagram? We had it at the start. We had this cool little diagram that shows that our S3 bucket is pointing to the knowledge base, right? So the information that we've stored in here is going to get processed here. And once it's processed, it actually goes to another service. So OpenSearch Serverless is that other service that stores all the process information. And that's the reason why we're picking it here. Okay, so we're going to pick OpenSearch Serverless, and we're going to move on next to review and finalize the creating of our knowledge base. That was pretty quick. Okay, and we have a handy checklist here that you can use to review everything. Is the name correct? Yes. The name is correct. Oh. I've got a little situation here. Okay, cool. So we got the name is correct. Is the data source type S3? Yes, it is. All right. Is the embeddings model Titan Text Embeddings v2? Let's check. Does it say here? Nope. Is the embeddings model Titan Text Embeddings v2? Yes, it is. And is the vector store, does it say quick create with OpenSearch? It does. Good stuff. So just like that, you've created your knowledge base. Done. High five to you. If you made it here, that's really impressive. You know, as a recap, the knowledge base and what we're doing here is the data layer of our web app. It stores all of the information that our chatbot needs to know. Now, the web app is not just a data layer. The web app also has a backend. It also has a front end. So we got other parts of our web app to sort out before we can really get to this ending stage, okay? But this is in sight. We're making progress, which is pretty cool. Congrats to you. All right. And if this is your first time creating a knowledge base, 2 quick things to know. First thing is it takes time for this knowledge base to create. If it's still loading after 5 minutes, that's normal. If it's still loading after 20 minutes, that's not quite normal. Maybe like try recreating your knowledge base. I remember once it was loading for 30 minutes straight, and that was my first time creating a knowledge base, and I just sat there thinking, oh my goodness, like I don't think it's working. But then the second time I recreated the whole flow, the knowledge base finished creating in about 5 minutes. And then just know that it does cost money to have a knowledge base, especially because you have a vector store as well, okay, with OpenSearch Serverless. We need this because our chatbot needs this, but man, it costs money to have a vector store. So please make sure that even if you don't get to the end of this project today, just delete everything, and we got the steps for deleting everything in this project as well. Delete it because it will probably start racking up charges for every single hour that you leave it running, okay? Great. So this is our knowledge base already created. So that's really, really cool. And we're ready to just take a screenshot now of our knowledge base's information. Okay, cool. And then next is, just answering why we created the knowledge base. Let's reflect on that. Cool. So we created a knowledge base to store all the information that our chatbot needs to know. This is important because it sets up the data layer of our entire web app. Without the knowledge base, our chatbot wouldn't know how to answer our tailored questions. All right, so our web app's data is all set up, and we can now zoom into step 2, which is to clone the web app. Cool. This is cool. We're gonna spend a bit of time outside of AWS now, so don't be too like, oh no. If I guess spending time in the local terminal intimidates you, we're still gonna go through everything step by step together. You got this, and there's a first time for everything. So give it a shot. I'm excited for you. Now we're gonna clone the web app, and we're gonna be cloning a web app because the web app's front end and back end. So this is a finished web app. The front end, so like the visual stuff that you can see, and the back end, which is the code for connecting everything between your data layer and your front end layer, and making sure like all of these different parts of your web app is talking. That code doesn't live on AWS. You have to pretty much write it yourself, to create that web app. It's going to be a little bit complex to write the code for a web app, so we have prepared some starter code for you today. Instead of writing everything from scratch, line by line, what we have for you is a pre-built web app that has all of the components ready to go. From the front-end chat interface to the back-end API code, all of that is written. And to start using this app, we simply just need to clone the web app, which means to copy the code and basically download the code so that you have a copy of it in your local computer. Okay, so in this step, we're going to be copying the web app's code from GitHub into your local machine. In this step, we will clone web app code into our local machine. We're doing this in order to have our web app's front end and back end set up without having to write all the code from scratch ourselves. We'll be tailoring this web app. We'll still be tailoring this web app to our knowledge base. Okay? All done. Think of it like you're downloading a template, and you're eventually going to be filling in this template with the information about your data layer, so your knowledge base and your chatbot that you're using, so that the web app is using all of your settings while still giving you some existing front-end and back-end code. All right. Now, to clone code, we're going to need to visit the code. The code currently lives online. It lives inside GitHub in a public repository. So when you click on this link, you're going to be able to access the code right here. Ooh, interesting. Welcome. Welcome to the code. Exciting to have you here. And you're going to notice that there are 3 separate files in the repository here. We got main.py, or really the main Python file. And this main Python file, think of it as my backend code, literally. The main Python file contains an API that connects to the Amazon Bedrock chatbot. If you're new to APIs and you're like, what the heck is going on? An API is basically software that lets 2 different kinds of applications talk to each other. In our case, we want 2 applications to talk to each other. Our web app and Amazon Bedrock, the knowledge base that lives inside AWS right now. We want them to talk to each other, and this main Python file contains the code for doing that, for connecting those 2. And then we got web app Python file. What's going on here? So the web app Python file is a version of main Python file. You can think of this as a replacement for this. Once we've tested the API by running main Python file, we're going to use main Python file to just test. Does the connection actually work between our app and Bedrock? Once we verify that the connection works, web app Python file will be running the same API. It runs the exact same code using the exact same setup, but it adds one more thing. It says, I'm going to run the API and the backend code plus run the UI or the front end, so that you're not only just connected to your Bedrock knowledge base, you also have a lovely chat interface, a lovely web app to show. Okay? And last, we got a requirements text file. What is this? All right, it looks like a bunch of jumbled up words, but I promise you it actually means something very, very important. And the requirements text file contains a series of things that your environment needs to have in order to run the web app. A web app, unfortunately, is not as simple as any kind of web app code. Is not as simple to run as just downloading something from the App Store. Okay, when you download something from the App Store, it's packaged and contained so that when you run the app, it has all of the required tools it needs to run, like all inside that one package. So you only have to double click on like the app's icon and voila, it just runs. Web app code by itself does not work that way. It's just code, and sometimes you need to install some tools into your environment in order to run the code. Okay, so this is the list of the tools you need, and luckily, downloading all of that into your local environment takes just one line of code, and you will still be able to delete everything that you've downloaded here in just another line of code as well. So it's going to be very easy to use this file, and it's going to be very important because it tells you everything that your computer needs or your local environment needs in order to run these files today. Okay, so these are the main 3 files that concern the backend of our web app, but we got the front end here, which is covered inside little folders. Okay, so we got index.html that defines the content of our web app. So index.html is the file that says, oh yeah, let's have a card here that says automate your browser. Let's have a card here that says threat detection. Let's have a card here, like it writes the content of the web app. You know, what is the title, what is the subtitle, what text, what buttons. And then style.css is like, what font should we use? What colors should we use? How wide should each card be? So it's really like the styling of the content is inside style.css. So as you can note, as you might notice now, that means frontend is up here in these folders. Whoa, apologies team. Frontend is in these folders. Backend is in these files that end with Py or Python. Voila. So if we were to download this entire folder of code, we're basically downloading our web app's entire frontend and backend, which is great. So let's go ahead and clone it. Let's go ahead and bring all of this code into our local computer, shall we? All right, so let's go and clone. And what we're going to do first is we're going to go into our computer's local terminal, which should be terminal if you're running a Mac OS, or it might be called PowerShell if you're using Windows. Okay, so when you're ready, let's bring this over here so that everyone can see. Okay, so I've got my terminal running now on my Mac OS. And if you don't know how to find this, what you're gonna do is you're gonna just click on Launchpad, for example, or find the menu search bar that searches through all the applications in your computer. And, oh, this does not look beautiful. There we go. And in the search bar, I typed in terminal in order to find my terminal. And I opened it, and it looks like this. And in your terminal, we're just going to make sure that our terminal is navigating to the documents directory. So let's go to the documents directory, and the command is right here. Cool. So you're inside your documents directory, and we're going to go run this command to clone the repository. Git clone HTTPS URL. Now, this URL is just a placeholder. So we actually should be replacing this placeholder with code. So we're going to go into this code button and just copy the HTTPS URL like this. Okay? So once it's copied, let's go paste that here and run. Ooh. Oh, okay. So when you press enter on your computer, you might see that it runs right away. Just runs. Mine says, yo, you already have this web app in your computer, ? And that's true, because I have this web app running on my computer, and it's the reason why I kept it, so that we can all see this. Because if I deleted it, I was really worried that we won't get to see this demo of the working app from the start of the project. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to quickly try to fix this myself by moving this away. Okay, and let me try git clone again. Okay, I'm going to try to do git clone HTTPS URL, run it. Okay, now we're cloning. This is probably what you will see. And it's the process of your computer grabbing a copy of the code that we see in GitHub. So we're basically downloading, downloading and opening a zip file containing all of this stuff inside. Cool. So once it's all cloned, you can head into the project you've cloned. So you can run the command cd next to rag web app, or if you're using Windows, the Windows equivalent. Cool. And let's go into it. Okay, so we're now opening this folder that we just cloned, or this repository that we cloned. And we're going to use pwd to just make sure that you're inside that folder now. Good, you're inside the folder, and it means that you've just cloned the repository to your local machine. Great work. Okay, so now that you have all the project files ready to work with, well done. You're now going to set up something called a virtual environment to start running the web app. Okay? So let's start running the web app by creating a virtual environment. Cool. What is a virtual environment, you might be thinking? I'm going to just show you by running the code first, which is Python 3 -m -v. Okay? So what is a virtual environment? A virtual environment is like a special folder that contains, in your computer, that contains its own copy of, Python, package managers, any extra packages your project needs. Now, this is a bit too technical of an explanation. Think of a virtual environment as like a separate folder for a specific project that you're running. In our case, we're running a specific project, right? We're running this web app. And just like how you might have different folders for different school subjects or different kinds of projects you have, each virtual environment keeps all the tools and packages you install in one place. The best part about having a virtual environment is the fact that everything in this environment is separate and temporary. When you delete your environment folder, all the packages you installed get removed too, and that keeps your computer really, really tidy. Okay, imagine if, I think of this as those portable work bags that you might have. Let's say you're just working on a random project and you're like a builder with lots of different tools that you need. You're gonna want to have a special bag or a special folder with all the tools that you need for this one job. Go to that job, do the job, and once you're done, if you don't need those tools anymore, you can just collect that bag of tools and just throw it away. And in our case, we're kind of starting a new bag by creating this virtual environment. And then as we install tools to run this web app, we put all of those tools in this bag. Okay, and we run the web app within this bag. And the web app works, it looks great, we tested it, that's perfect. And when we're done with this project today, we can just throw that entire bag away. Okay, and the reason for keeping everything in the bag is so it doesn't spill out to the rest of your computer and it doesn't take up so much space. So it's great. Virtual environments is a great way for just keeping everything tidy. Cool. Now, we are going to be installing a bunch of things because there are a bunch of requirements that you saw here. Yeah, remember these requirements? These are all things you need to install in order to run the code that we have today. And most of us will probably not want to keep all of these tools and all of these packages beyond this project. So they're all just going to get installed into the virtual environment instead of directly into your computer. And then later on, when we delete the virtual environment, all of these tools get deleted alongside it too. I hope that makes it clear. All right, so I've run the command for creating my virtual environment. And if you see nothing in your terminal, no errors, it means that the virtual environment's been created. So we can activate it. Activating it is just wake up, environment. I'm going to use this environment now. Okay, and you can see the terminal recognizes it. I have something like this, venv, at the start of my next command prompt, and that basically says, from now on, all the commands you run are just going to be run within this virtual environment. All the work you're going to do is just going to exist within this special little folder, this special little bag. Okay, so all the tools that you install just going to go straight into the bag instead of your entire computer's local environment. Great. So we've activated the virtual environment. So let's do a bit of reflection and then keep tracking along after this. A virtual environment helps us by keeping all of the packages and tools we install for this web app in one place. We need a virtual environment because we have a lot of tools to install coming up. And it's a lot easier to delete them after. It's a lot easier to delete them later if they're all in a single environment. Cool. So our virtual environment helps us to keep all of the packages and tools we install for this web app project in one place. We have a lot of packages and libraries to install coming up, and it's a lot easier to delete them later if they're inside that virtual environment. Okay, simple as that. So we've cloned the web app, and we activated a virtual environment to run it. So we're now ready to just run the web app next. Now, as a recap, we cloned some code, right? So we cloned some code over here, and the code that we cloned contains two parts: the front end, the bunch of folders over here, and the back end over here. And to clarify, the back end gives you two different options. Option A is to just run the API, just run the connection between your app and Bedrock. Option 2 is to run the webapp.python file, which runs the same API, the same connection, plus the front end. You only run one of these files at a time. Okay, you only run either just main Python file or you run just webapp.python file. We're going to start by doing the simple one. The simple one is main Python file, and it only has the connection. We're just going to run this one first because it is a lot simpler to understand if you run into any errors. And then once your setup is perfectly good, you can move on over to the next one, the more complicated backend file, because if you run into any errors there, it might be harder to diagnose compared to if you run into errors in the simpler backend file. Cool, are you ready? Let's go into it. Let's test the backend. Now, like I mentioned before, so we've got the data layer, the backend layer, and the frontend layer. And so now this step, we're just going to test that backend layer. Does it actually work? Can you really run the backend code? We simply just copied and pasted it so far, like we just cloned it, but we don't actually know yet if that code works on your computer. So we're going to do a bit of testing to just make sure the code is running properly. In this step, we will be running the backend code in main.python to make sure that the backend code we cloned is actually working properly in our local environment. If it works properly, we're doing this because it's important to test each layer of our web app before running it all. Cool. Overall, it's important to test each layer of our web app before we try to run them all together. Cool. So what we're going to do next is we're going to try run the API. Cool. If you have any questions, I know we're going relatively, and I think we're doing okay with pace. But if I'm going too slow or if I'm going too fast, let me know in the chat. I'll just give us a minute or 30 seconds to ask any questions. Cool. Okay, so let's run the command now. And the command basically says, using Python and using Unicorn is a specific package, a specific tool you need, let's run the main Python file. Okay, and --reload basically says if there's been any changes to the main Python file, just reload it automatically. Shall we try running this code in our local terminal? Let's give it a go. Oof, we got an error. The command didn't work, did it? So what does this command do? It also, once it runs the main Python file, it also makes it available at a specific address in our browser, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, you might see an error like this. No module named Unicorn. If your virtual environment doesn't actually have that Unicorn package yet, we have this whole requirements text file of things that your virtual environment needs, and all we did was clone the code. We haven't actually installed these tools yet. So next up is we're just going to install all of the tools mentioned in this file. To do that, you can even actually run cat requirements.txt. This is just like a side extra thing you can do in order to open up that list of requirements again. So you can see this exact list. That's from our GitHub repository. So what's in this list aside from Unicorn, which is that web server that runs the API? We also have Fast API. Sorry about that one. That was just to quickly step out for a second there. But we also have Fast API, which is another tool that helps us with building APIs very, very quickly. And we have Boto 3, all different kinds of, Boto 3 should be up here. Okay, that's another tool which helps us talk to Bedrock, helps us talk to our AWS resources. And we also have another tool called python.env, another important one. I think it's over here, but it's hidden somewhere else. That's responsible for loading environment variables. You don't need to understand all of this right now. We actually explain more as we go, but this is more like an extra for the curious. Cool. What's more important for us to know is how to install these tools. So we do this by running pip3 install -r requirements text file. So here we go. My terminal is now going to go crazy trying to install everything that's in that list. Okay, cool. And in the meantime, we got Aruva asking a great question here. Do we need to buy a subscription for the guide? This step-by-step guide is under Nextbook Pro, so yes, you will need a Pro subscription. And if you'd like, you can always follow the guide like here in our YouTube video as well. Or you can also check out like students' documentation about this project in order to get access to like the steps and tips on how to do this as well. Okay, great stuff, team. Nice. So we've installed the requirements, and you can even run another command called pip list to see all of those installed tools in front of you. This list, if you can't see it, it means that you've correctly installed everything, which is great. Now we're going to take a screenshot of this list, this beautiful list of installed packages, and add that to our documentation. To run the API, we had to install requirements like Fast API, Unicorn, Boto 3. These packages are important because our web app code, our web app's front end and back end code, need them to run certain features, e.g. the connection to Bedrock. So important. The running of the API. So important. Cool. So let's start running the API again by rerunning, that previous command. If you're into shortcuts like me, just know that you can always press the up arrow in your keyboard to repeat an old command. Oh, let's not install that again. Oops, I repeated the wrong command. I should be repeating this command, which is about loading the API, or really the main Python file, from the terminal. Ah, cool. Of course, we run into an error again. It says the address is already in use. That's true. It's because I am running this web app from another terminal, which is the reason why we could see this. But I'm going to shut this down now. We're going to say goodbye to my demo, and we're just going to focus solely on what we're doing together in here. And now it can run because I just shut down the other existing server that was running this in the background. So all good. We're going to let go of my demo one, and we're just going to focus on what we're creating step by step together. Great. No longer do we see that error that says you don't have Uvicorn because we've installed Uvicorn. And now we're using Uvicorn to run the file, the main.python file, which starts up the web app. Okay? So for us to see it in action, let us highlight this URL. It says Uvicorn is now running on this URL, which means what Uvicorn, that tool, is running is available and accessible from this URL. So let's run that in our browser. Run it. And we got it. Welcome to your RAG chatbot API. You should see this message, which confirms that your API is running. The code runs on your computer. That's awesome. Great. Shall we take a screenshot showing that welcome message? Let's do it. And let's add that to our documentation. So what do we see at the root endpoint here? When we visited the root endpoint, now the root endpoint basically means just the URL that the terminal gives you, that exact URL with nothing, no specific page that we're looking at. It's just the root URL, which is exactly the URL that your terminal gives you. So here we're going to say, when we visited the root endpoint, we saw a message from our API. This confirms that the backend code is working in our local environment. Our API is working. Or we can say our API is running. This will be more specific. Nice. That's good. Okay. Did you see the amount of progress we've done so far, by the way? This is crazy. Look, we've done step 0, step 1, step 2, step 3, done. We just got all this to go. And you know what? You know, it's up to you whether or not the secret mission is for you. Now, I personally think the secret mission is super, super valuable. It really gives you a deep understanding of the code behind your web app and behind the API specifically for this secret mission. So we just saw the API's welcome message. Welcome to your RAG chatbot API. That's very cool. So in this secret mission, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking into what's behind the scenes when you visit this endpoint. Okay, so your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to peek under the hood of your web app, and let's discover how that welcome message and the rest of your API's functionality actually works. Yo, big shout out to Amber as well. That's sending some very lovely messages in the chat. Thank you. It is a cool menu. We got some awesome secret missions coming up here. Each one of them, amazing. So let's get into that first secret mission now. And yes, if you have done the previous projects in this series, you might have done that project on accessing your chatbot over an API. So you might be wondering, oh, wait a second, I feel like I have peeked under the hood of my web app and I have looked into my API's functionality before. Should I still do the secret mission? If you're wondering that, just know that this secret mission dives even deeper into the API code than that previous project. So it's a really good idea, and it's a great way to level up your understanding of APIs if you do this secret mission. Cool. So we're pro, so we're gonna jump in and unlock our secret mission today. Yeah, perfect. So we've unlocked the secret mission. Amazing. And let's crack open the code now. Now, I'm going to just open the code again for us so we have something to like visually match what we're about to go through, what we're about to see in the code. Okay, so like we've mentioned before, main.python file is kind of like the backend, the simple backend that we're running for our web app. We have two backend options, either the main Python file or the web app Python file. This main Python file is the first one that we're looking at. And it contains some code that enables a connection between your app and Amazon Bedrock, which basically is the connection between your app and the knowledge base that's storing all of the documents we uploaded in step 1. So if you want to know, why should I care about understanding APIs? Just know that APIs is an amazing tool that's used not just in this project, but in all different kinds of web apps and apps around the world, because they power the way applications can talk to each other. And applications talk to each other all the time. In our example, we're going to be connecting our own app over here with Bedrock, chilling inside here. Like, how does this app that we're writing here somehow talk to this? It's like it almost lives in two different spaces until you connect them with the API. And of course, APIs are also used in other parts of other kinds of apps, like messaging apps. How do they send messages? APIs help with that. How does your weather app know the temperature? There's an API that probably gives the weather app that information. Oh, the temperature in this region is this. The temperature in that region is this. And the weather app is responsible for displaying all of those temperatures in a very visual way. And we also have banking apps for transferring money. Crazy. How do banking apps know how to do that? Because we have APIs that talk to each other so that when you transfer money from here to here, in the background, your actual bank account balances is being moved across, because now your bank account balances are oh, I need to send money here. Okay, let me actually do that action in the background. Cool. Alrighty. Plus, once when we run into any API errors, and trust me, this is going to happen later in this project, understanding the code is going to give you a big leverage, or a big advantage when it comes to fixing these errors. Ooh. We got some lovely comments in the chat. Hi, Selva. Nice to meet you. Thanks for jumping along. And we got Yadav saying, can you share the YouTube link? Of course. Now, I just realized the YouTube link might not be visible inside the Instagram chat. So where it's best is, where you can best find it is to go into our YouTube channel. Whoa. You can go into the NextWork YouTube channel and find this project, find this live stream over here. Over here, which is build a RAG web app with Bedrock, right here. And our channel name is called NextWork, or you can search up It's NextWork like this. Very fun, very fun. Big shout out to Amber for mentioning this is super cool. I never really understood how APIs work, even though I've done previous projects. Yeah, APIs is definitely something that you understand more and more with practice and with repetition. So big shout out to the secret mission for giving us some of these reps. Did you write this code? Very sweet. And yeah, this code took a lot of trial and error in the background, but it's working now, which is really cool. Okay, so in your GitHub repository, you can open up the main Python file. And here, in our case, this main Python file is all about connecting your app to your RAG chatbot in Amazon Bedrock. So overall, APIs are like translators between applications, and that's the reason why we're using it in our web app. In our web app, we need an API because APIs are software tools that help us with connecting different applications together, aka, or also known as, get them to talk and share information with each other. We're using our API. To connect our app with what? What do you think? Amazon Bedrock. Great work, team. Thank you very much. Cool. So this main Python file might look a little chunky when you're just seeing it for the first time. But actually, when you dig a little deeper, you might notice that there's actually 4 sections that make up this main Python file. It becomes a little bit easier to understand once we break it up into 4 different sections and go through them step by step. So let's do that now. The 4 sections really is this main Python file does 4 things. It imports the tools that you need, and don't forget we just installed a bunch of tools in the previous step there. So it's now importing the tools we installed to try run them and use them. Second thing is it loads some environment variables, and we're going to go into what environment variables do. The third one is it creates the fast API app. The fourth one is it sets up what our API does. So we're kind of like saying, let's get all the tools we need for this API to work. Let's load some environment variables, which are things that the API, which is information that the API needs to work. And then we're going to wake up and we're going to say, API, you need to run. And then once the API is running, it's like, okay, like, what do you want me to do? We're going to say, oh, this is what you need to do. When so-and-so visits this, you should do this. And we're going to see how we set that up here. So the tools that we're going to be importing include FastAPI, Boto3, OS, and .env. Now, FastAPI gets us a tool called FastAPI. How intuitive. So normally, you'd have to write a lot of code to handle things like receiving user input. Like when a user sends you a chat message, there's actually a bunch of backend code in the background that says, this is how you interpret the chat message. This is how you make sure this user's message is actually legit. It contains all the information we need. This is how we receive like the chat message. How are we going to go from the browser into your backend code? Like that connection usually requires a bit of code as well. So what's going to happen is FastAPI takes care of that part for you. It makes it a lot faster and easier to build APIs, and it's actually one of the most popular Python frameworks out there, which is why companies like Uber and Netflix use FastAPI as well. Then we have Boto3, which is all about actually connecting to our AWS environment and all of the resources inside. So once our API receives a question from the user, it's probably going to want to pass that request on to whatever you've set up in AWS, this knowledge base here. In order to even access the knowledge base, it's going to need a tool called Boto3 to connect to AWS. And then we got import OS, which is all about working with environment variables. Now, we talked about how our API needs to also do step 2, which is to load the environment variables. And who's doing that loading? Who's actually loading the variables for us? A tool called OS is going to be doing that. And then, I misspoke. So the tool called load.env here is going to be doing the actual loading, and then the tool called OS is going to be doing the actual using of those variables. So interesting to see how we have 2 tools that need to work together for us to do a simple function, which is to use some variables that are stored in your local environment. Okay, great. Awesome. Do we have any questions, by the way, about all of these tools? I know we went through them relatively quickly, so if you have any questions, we're just going to pause for a little second here and send them my way. Cool. Okay, so we're going to now answer some questions about what we've just learned. What tools do we need to connect our web app to Bedrock? Cool, let's dig into it. Digging a little deeper into our API's code, the main tools we'll need to import are Fast API. It's actually written like this. Fast API, Boto 3, we got OS, and we have load.env. Okay, so we got a range of tools here. These tools help us by, what does it do? It helps us with connecting to AWS, that's Boto 3's job, loading environment variables, that's OS and load.env, and Fast API, what does it do? And it literally, Fast API, I think the best way to explain it is written right up here. It's like a Python framework that takes away tasks like handling user input when you build an API. Okay, so we can call that using a Python framework for building APIs. Cool, all done. So we've got all these tools imported, great. What do we do after we import all of these tools? Of course, we make these tools work. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna use load.env to say, hey, let's load some environment variables from our environment. Okay, so these are the environment variables that we're about to use. We got AWS region, which means that we're gonna try figure out what AWS region we're gonna be using based on the environment variables. And then we've got knowledge base ID, which basically says which knowledge base are we gonna be using to answer these questions. And then we have model ARN, which is basically saying which Bedrock AI model is gonna be there to generate the chat responses back to the user. Okay, so all three are such important information. It's really information you need to set up that connection to your AWS resources. Cool. And why are we even using environment variables? You know, environment variables are basically information that just gets stored in your local environment, your local terminal, instead of getting hard-coded into your software. You know, we could technically just say AWS region equals USC2, knowledge base ID equals knowledge base ID, and then like actually type in the ID in here, or model ARN equals, and then type in the actual model ARN. That's an option for you, but it's actually not best practice because it poses a security risk. Information like knowledge base ID, model ARN, if someone else gets a hold of them, they can easily try break into your account, or they have enough information to try do other things that could compromise your security. So in order to protect ourselves, we're going to try hide our information into environment variables and then use code to grab those environment variables without making it obvious to potential attackers. Cool. The environment variables we need include the AWS region, knowledge base ID, and model ARN. This info is stored separately because potential attackers can use it to steal data or do harmful things. We are protecting our info by keeping them It seems like I run out of characters. Classic scenario. But let's have a look. The environment variables we need include the AWS region, knowledge base ID, and model ARN. This information is stored separately because potential attackers can use it to steal data, and let's just leave it there. We are protecting our information by keeping them away from our web app code. I would say we are protecting our information by avoiding hard coding them into the web app code. Cool. Done. So nice work learning about environment variables. So we've done two things now. We're going to import some tools, and then we're going to import some information that lives in our local environment. Next up, we got app equals fast API. Interesting. What does this do? So this line is where everything starts coming together. When we write app equals fast API, we're creating a new fast API application that powers the entire API that we're running. Think of it like we're setting up a central command center. A fast API app will handle requests that comes in, figure out what to do with it, and then send back the right response. That's the fast API tool we imported at the start. Okay, so it does lots of handy things like checking data to make sure it's structured correctly, converting data into Python objects, which makes it code that we can process in the next section, which is after here when we're when we're trying to pass information to Amazon Bedrock. So great, we've got fast API now, which is making the most out of another tool that we just imported, fast API. And then we have define get Bedrock client. Okay, and this is from line 18 onwards. What does this part of the code do? So think of this function like you're setting up a dedicated phone line now. We're like calling Amazon Bedrock. Hello? Once we set it up, it basically means we're able to send requests to Bedrock and get responses back. So this function is all about setting up a connection to Bedrock. Okay? And here we even say, once we create the connection, why are we connecting to AWS? You know, Boto 3 is just say connect to AWS. It doesn't say connect to Bedrock yet. We actually connect to Bedrock when we define why we're connecting to AWS. Okay, we're saying, hello AWS, can I please talk to Bedrock? There's a specific thing I want to run called Bedrock Agent Runtime. This service, Bedrock Agent Runtime, is specifically designed to work with Bedrock agents and knowledge bases, which is what we're doing for our chatbot. And then it even says the region name. So where is the region where your knowledge base lives in? We need to define that here. And of course, it's an environment variable that's going to say Ohio, where we set up our knowledge base. For anyone that's new to this kind of code, this kind of backend code, just know that no, we're not using the AWS CLI right now, if the CLI is what you're familiar with. We're using a different mode of communicating with AWS, and it's called AWS SDK for Python. And this tool called AWS SDK for Python, for some odd reason, I wish I had looked this up to know why, but the short form of it is called Boto 3. Okay, and that's the reason why Boto 3 is what we imported. But you can literally go replace, whenever you see Boto 3, just say it literally means AWS SDK for Python, and Boto 3 for short. We would use the CLI to talk directly to our AWS resources from the terminal, but we'll use the SDK if we want our code to talk to AWS. It's not us talking to AWS directly, it's our code that's talking to AWS this time. Cool? So that's the reason why this project is such like a level up and such a wrap up or a finale of the entire series, because you're using more advanced ways to communicate with AWS. No longer you're thinking about a one direct connection between yourself. You need to think about how that connection can scale. What if I want my friend to connect to my chatbot. They don't know how to run commands, maybe. They don't know how to run direct AWS API queries. So how can I make this easier for them? Okay, you make this easier for them by putting that connection into code, and just get your friend to run the code instead of having to like set up all of this AWS like environment set up themselves. Yeah? So let's reflect on what we've learned here by writing about this in this question. Our API uses the Python AWS SDK to set up a connection between our app and our AWS environment. The difference between the AWS CLI and an SDK is that the CLI is for running quick commands in the terminal for a direct connection, while the SDK is for integrating that connection within our code, into our code. Okay, cool. Let me just re-explain that, please. Our API uses the Python AWS SDK to set up a connection between our app and AWS. The difference between the AWS CLI and the SDK is that the CLI is for running commands in the terminal, while the SDK is for integrating that connection into our apps. Great. And shout out to Ariana here saying this project looks truly amazing. I'm finishing the compute section and then I'll dive right into AI. Ooh, exciting. I hope you enjoy it, Ariana. This is so kind. I appreciate it. Cool. Now we've talked about this, okay? We've talked about all this, which is like, all right, we're going to use Fast API to set up the API, and then we're going to use Boto 3 to set up that connection to AWS. Now we're going to talk about this chunkier part, okay, which is basically what the API is here to do. You know, what's the point of creating the API? What's the point of connecting to Bedrock? Well, because there's two things that we want to do. There's two things we want to do. One is defined in this part. The other one is defined in this bigger part. Now, this first part uses app.get/, which means, hey, at the root route of our API, which is the API's main entrance, return the message, welcome to your RAG chatbot API. Does this look familiar? Does this look familiar? Does this look familiar? Okay, so what we're seeing, what we saw when we first visited our root route is actually just our main Python files code at work. We visited the root route, which is basically the root of your API, and it did exactly as we defined. It returned this message to us. Now let's break into a small little explainer session. Quick 3 minutes. What are routes? You know, what is a root route? So a route, I'm going to close the window. It's getting loud outside. All right, team, I hope that's better for sound. So routes in an API is like paths to specific parts of your API. So you can think of routes as a way to divide up our API into different kinds of paths. So depending on the path that your user takes, they're going to get access to a different kind of feature or a different kind of function. This is so important. Like, web apps need routes because imagine, you know, if you wanted to do so many different things with your API. Imagine if we say, oh, I want my API to connect with this chatbot, but also connect to this other chatbot. Oh, but what if I also wanted the ability for my chatbot to answer questions using a different AI model? What if I want to test whether or not my chatbot can answer questions using AI model 1 versus AI model 2 versus AI model 3? And I want different kinds of paths that enables all three variations at the same time. Because one option is like, oh, I can just change the model ID that I'm using in the back in the code. But different routes means all three paths are available for you to use at the same time. You don't need to almost like sacrifice one model ID in order to use another AI model. You can have all of this available to you together at the same time. And that's what routes do for you. Just kind of like opens up different kinds of features of your API in parallel, so you can run all of them together. So in our case, we only have 2 routes here. We got the root route, okay? And then we've got this special route, okay, that says Bedrock query, okay? So this special route over here is basically saying this is where the user should go if they actually want to talk with the chatbot. They should visit /bedrock/query. The root route doesn't do anything related to Bedrock. No mention of Bedrock here. It doesn't actually do anything. It just returns a message. So Bedrock/query is the place to go if you actually want to use the knowledge base and the chatbot that you set up in AWS. Cool. So if you want to know more about the code, we've got a breakdown here within our project guide. But for this live project demo, we'll just explain it in a more simple way. So what this code is doing is it actually, within the API that you're visiting, you're going to need to define specifically what you want to ask your chatbot. You want to ask them, what is AWS? Do you want to ask them, who's next work? Do you want to ask them, what kind of documentation do I have? What kind of projects have I done? What is the question? You need to put that into the actual request itself. So here's an example. You need to go Bedrock/query, what is next work? This is an example of one that would work. Because we've got /bedrock/query (text), which is like the question I want to ask is what is next work. And once that's done, this API is responsible for grabbing that question. It's responsible for grabbing the what is next work part of the URL and then sending that over to your knowledge base. It's going to send it over to your knowledge base here. It's going to say, hey, we got a question over here. Someone wants to know what is AWS or what is next work. And then it's going to grab the response from your from the chatbot or like from the knowledge base and then send it back to you. Okay, and it returns the response. Cool. So that's at a high level what this specific route does, this Bedrock/query route does. But if you're interested in knowing more, we've got a literal step-by-step breakdown or line-by-line breakdown of the code in the guide too. Our API has 2 main routes. One is the root route, just returns a message. And the other is a special route for querying our knowledge base, i.e., ask your chatbot a question. In general, routes help us to separate our API's functionalities, like what it can do, into different paths. Oof, I ran out of characters again. Okay, so to solve my little character count problem, I'm just going to condense what I've written at the start here. So our API has two main routes. One, the root route, which returns a welcome message, and two, a special route for querying our knowledge base, which means asking your chatbot a question. In general, routes help us to separate our API's functionalities into paths. Nice. And we got Sebastian in the chat saying that's a dub route. It actually is. And we got Erwin saying, cool. Hey, Erwin. Good to have you here. Man, this is so fun. Thanks so much for being here. Okay, well done. You've just investigated the main Python file, and you've become a bit of an expert on how our API works behind the scenes, especially how it's set up to connect to Bedrock and handle those queries that we might send them. So now that you know about this API inside out, you might notice that we've actually only run one of its endpoints. We've actually only run the root endpoint. We haven't used it to chat with our chatbot yet. We haven't run the other endpoint yet using Bedrock/query. So why don't we do that? Why don't we do that in the next step? Let's try run the query endpoint and see how it works. Cool. In this step, we will test the second route in our API, the query route. This is an important route that actually gets us to ask our knowledge base a question and get results, which tests whether the connection to our data layer is actually working. Cool. So to test the query endpoint, like we've learned just now, we need to actually add something called /bedrock/query text, and then you put in your question. So I can ask who was Nextwork as my question and try run it. And classic Nextwork style, we're going to see an error here. Okay? We've got an error, and it looks exactly like what's in the screenshot, spookily. And here's the challenge that you can have today. Looks like we've got an error because of the way our API has been set up. So your challenge now is to try troubleshoot these issues yourself and get the API to work. If you don't want to troubleshoot on your own, maybe this is your first project in the entire series, troubleshooting is still fairly new to you, you're more than welcome to skip this troubleshooting challenge and just move on to getting step-by-step guidance, which is at the bottom here. We go through all of the errors you might run into and go through a step-by-step guide on how to resolve it. But if you're up for the challenge, try troubleshoot this yourself. Your challenge is to fix all of this. Eventually, when it's correct, you're going to see an explanation for what is Nextwork, come up here instead of any error message. Now, to troubleshoot this, you have a little checklist here that also helps you. Here are some common things to check to make sure that you have actually all the things you need for this API to work, and you can check this off one by one to test whether or not you've done everything you need to do. Cool. Now, Sebastian asked a great question. Do you need to URL encode the query? Yes, technically you do need to do this because I'm going to just put through the URL I've used in the chat. And you're going to notice that we do have, it is encoded. But luckily for us, I usually just type it in as it is, I'm just typing into a chat box without thinking about the encoding. And once you press enter, the encoding just happens for you. So I hope that's the same case for you. But for myself, whenever I type in a message and you press enter, if you do this over the URL, the URL field at the top of your browser, it just happens for you automatically. Okay, so For everyone that's here to do the troubleshooting challenge, the list of things to check off is whether or not you have requested access for the AI model you want to use to answer questions. You want to make sure you've synced your knowledge base and your S3 bucket. You want to make sure you've installed AWS CLI locally. You want to make sure that once you've installed it, have you configured it with access keys that are actually working? And then whether or not you've configured it with the right region, and whether or not you have environment variables set up here. So let's get into it. And actually, I've just realized, especially since we're doing this as a step-by-step project guide, instead of me following the challenge in this demo today, it might be better for me to follow actually the step-by-step guide for every single error you might run into, just in case we have some beginners in the audience here that are wanting to go through this step-by-step. So we're going to go through each of these tabs to help us resolve all of the errors we're going to run into. And yeah, as a heads up, this is a bit of a choose your own adventure kind of experience. So you'll only come across certain questions and screenshots if you run into that error and you visit that tab. Luckily for you, you don't need to actually answer all the questions and take all the screenshots to complete the project today. We've marked those questions as optional so that only the ones that you filled out are going to end up in your documentation as well. Okay, but following the step-by-step guidance, that first error was about parameter validation failing. Okay, you can see it here. And it says knowledge base ID is wrong. So this error actually tells us that your API isn't correctly configured with your knowledge base ID and model ARN. So for us to fix this, we need to add the environment variables. And we talked about those environment variables, actually. We talked about it right here. We said that we were going to import some information that already exists in our local terminal. But does that information actually exist in the local terminal? If you see this error, it tells you that no, the information doesn't exist locally yet. We're going to need to write that information and set it up locally first. To do that, let's run into our backend, into our terminal here, and just press Control-C like this. And then we're going to create a new environment file, which is a text file where you write your environment variables. Okay, so to do this, we're going to run touch.env, and then we're going to run nano.env. Touch.env creates the file, nano.env writes in the file. We have the Windows equivalent of those instructions if you are using Windows. Okay, so now we're here with an environment file, and this is where we write the environment variables. Here's your template for writing your environment variables. You've got US East 2 as your region, you've got a knowledge base ID, you've got a model ARN. Now the knowledge base ID is very, very easy to find. The model ARN, not so easy to find. So we can also say, oh yeah, and shout out to Erwin for saying touch command is also optional. This is true. For anyone that's used Nano, you're going to know that if you just run nano.env directly, it creates the file if it doesn't see that it exists in your terminal. I love that too. I love that too. So yeah, that's for the people who are kind of familiar with Nano file, with the Nano command. If the file doesn't exist yet, Nano is actually capable of creating the file to start with. Okay, cool. So the knowledge base ID, easy to find. Model ARN, harder to find. But that's okay. Let's find both information together. Okay? The knowledge base ID is right over in our AWS console. When you create your knowledge base, you would have seen this page with some information in there. So this is your knowledge base that we set up in step 1. And can you find the knowledge base ID? Do you see it here? You got 3 seconds. Bam! It's right over here, knowledge base ID. Okay, so all you gotta do, copy this ID, head on over to your environment environment file, and let's paste that ID over here. Done. Okay, knowledge base ID, done. Next one is the trickier one. Okay, this one is model ARN. And if this is your very first project in this entire RAG chatbot series, just know that all we've done so far is create the knowledge base, and we haven't actually touched on the AI model in step 1 yet. So if you'd like, you can go ahead and search how to find the model ARN of a Bedrock model if you want to find the command yourself. Or you can also choose give me the command to run the command for finding the ARN of your AI model. Okay, and for some more context, if this is new to you, what's happening in your chatbot is you have your knowledge base that contains all of the process information, but you also need an AI model for turning the search results from your knowledge base into chat responses that actually make sense and seem like a nice and lovely and friendly chat response to you. If your model, AI model, doesn't exist in your solution, what's going to happen is you send your chatbot a question, and the results are like, here are 5 search results that match your question. It's going to sound a little bit like Google, okay? We don't really want that. We want our AI chatbot to sound quite like a person. Oh, yeah, of course. Here, if you were asking about, what projects have you done, the chatbot ideally should talk like a human and respond like this. What's next work? What projects are in the portfolio? Give you proper responses like this. You need an AI model to make this happen. And that's the reason why we need a model ARN, to tell our web app which AI model we want to use to generate those chat responses. Now, in order for us to actually use that model ARN, we need to find the actual model ARN itself. Okay, we actually don't know what model ARN we're using yet, so let's go find it. The command to finding a model ARN looks like this: AWS Bedrock get foundation model, which means get the information about an AI model, and the model identifier is this. So you actually still need to give Cloud Shell, or you need to give AWS a specific model ID you want to investigate, and then once AWS gives you all the information it knows about that model ID, you'll notice that within that information contains the model ARN that we're looking for. So let's just try run this in Cloud Shell now. Cool. So we're going to wait a second for the environment to run. And while we wait, big shout out to everyone saying hello. Hello, Plaxides. We got Ariana saying in Vim, it's just Vim and the file name. Oh, good mention, Ariana. Thanks for mentioning that. So it seems like Vim and the file name is enough to start editing it. Great. Yay, and thank you so much. This is a really good explanation. Yeah, challenge me all the time. Let me know if there's actually an explanation that we want to talk more about. Okay. Now, we just tried running this command in Cloud Shell, and almost instantly, Cloud Shell's like, this command doesn't work. Your model ID is just a placeholder. It doesn't actually mean anything. We need to actually fill in the model ID as well. Okay, so this is where it gets complicated, right? Because we're just trying to find a model ARN, but to find a model ARN, there's something else we need to figure out, which is the model ID. It's almost like information inception, and we need to work into the smallest piece of information we can find, which is model ID, and then work our way up to say, okay, now that we found the model ID, what is the model ARN? And then we're going to use that model ARN in our web app. So to find the model ID, we actually will be able to find it in the console. So let's go into model catalog inside the Bedrock console. And then the model that we're going to be using for this project today it's a Llama model, because it's one of the more accessible and cheaper models to use in the world of Amazon Bedrock. And that Llama model is called Llama 3.3 70B Instruct. So you click into this, inside the model catalog. And here comes like a dedicated landing page just for this AI model. Now you can see like what this AI model is about. It looks amazing. And here's the model ID. Okay, this is the model ID of the AI model we want to use. And you can put that into your command now. So we're going to say AWS get foundation model. And here's the model ID that we're using. Give me all the information that you know about this model. Cool. Here comes the information. Okay, so the command's working now. And it even includes the ARN. Okay, this is the holy grail. This is what we were looking for. So we have the model ARN now. Amazing. And now that we have the model ARN, okay, we can copy it. And we can go back into our environment file and paste that in here. Okay, so once it's all pasted, I'm so excited. Okay, we can save the file and see how that changes the API. Okay, so I've saved the file now. And we can even run cat.env. So for all the Mac and Linux users, you can run cat.env to check whether or not everything inside your environment file is correct. So you can say, okay, so our environment file correctly has an AWS region variable, has the knowledge base ID, and it's also storing the model ARN. Great. Now, I just realized, I'm so glad I ran this command live. I just realized I don't think the ARN is stored correctly. I copied too much. The ARN doesn't need to have this entire line. It just needs what's inside the quote marks here. Okay, so I wrote that a bit incorrectly. So let me go back, use nano, and fix my mistake. Okay, so I'm gonna press Control-K. That's a nano kind of shortcut for deleting the whole line. And I'm gonna just try rewrite the model ARN. This time it's gonna be correct because I don't paste in the entire line from Cloud Shell. I just paste in the actual ARN itself, which is the information we need. So let's press Control-X, Y, Enter, which helps us with saving our file. Let's read it again. Now this looks correct, okay? Do you see the difference? No more of these like special little kinds of bits of information that Cloud Shell gave us when we ran the command. I just want the ARN itself. And now this looks perfect. Great. Everything is coming together. We have all the information that we need. So we can now restart our API and see if we can fix this error. Okay, we had parameter validation failed. Let's see if we fix the error now. Let's copy the code for running our API again, and let's wake it back up. Wake up! We've put in our environment variables. You should work now. Let's see. So once we run it, technically it should be able to actually analyze our question, which was who was Nextwork, and come back with an answer. You know, oh, Nextwork is an organization that provides projects. Can it do that now? Shall we check? Let me refresh my tab, which basically reloads out the API's response now that it's awake again. No, it didn't work. Look at that. The response is not beautiful, is it? The response says, sorry, I'm unable to assist you with this request. Hello? Why is that? Why is that? That's not a beautiful request. That's not a beautiful response at all. And you know what? That's totally okay. Oh, that's totally okay. If you still got an error, that's us. That's normal. Go back to your terminal, press Control-C, it's easy, press Control-C, and head back to the top of our troubleshooting tabs to see if there's another troubleshooting tab that we can look at to solve our error. Unable to assist you with this request is in this tab here. So we can now jump into this tab and go through the troubleshooting steps with this one, which is much easier than what we just did. Now, I'm going to call out the fact that I did not run into this middle one, which you would run into if you did not set up AWS CLI and your CLI access key. you could also run into other common errors. You might be seeing something different to me. You might be saying, unrecognized client exception, I got that. Or you might be saying, I got validation exception, something else. Or you might be saying, I got resource not found exception. I get it. There's so many different kinds of errors you could run into. So if you ran into different kinds of errors, just make sure to visit the appropriate tab and try troubleshoot there. But in our case, we got this one and able to assist you with this request. So we're going to follow the steps for this one. Now, if you see a response like this, it's not all bad news. The good news of this response compared to the previous one, it's the fact that we even got a response at all. It means your AI model is still capable of returning a response. It's just that the response isn't quite right. It tells you it doesn't know anything when actually it should know what is next work based on the documents we gave our chatbot. So what's left is to make sure that the AI models and knowledge base in Bedrock are actually set up correctly and are ready to use. Let's go investigate. First thing to investigate is whether or not you actually have access to the AI model that you're using. What is the model ARN that we're using is Meta Llama 3.3. We went through a whole ordeal getting the ID. So my question to you is, do you actually have access to this model? You can check whether you have access by going into your side navigation panel and click into the Model Access tab. Click into this. And then here, you're going to go check, do I have access to Llama? Okay. The one we're using is called 3.370B Instruct. This is the one we're using. If it says access granted, then great. You actually have access to that AI model. If it says something else, like available to request, and it's gray, it's not green, it means you actually still need to get access to that AI model. Okay? And let us also make sure that the embeddings model that you use when you set up your knowledge base is also granted as well. This is the model that we selected when we set up our knowledge base back in step 1. So I recommend referring back to step 1 if this feels foreign to you, Titan Text Embeddings v2. Okay, so I already have access, but if you need to request access, here are the instructions for requesting access too. Cool. Well, we already have access. And also, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I want to watch a project demo for the other errors, and I want to watch the project demo for requesting model access, I'll make sure to add in the YouTube description for this video exact timestamps of other project demos where I do exactly that. So I'm just going to make a note to myself to add the timestamps. If you want to follow the YouTube or like a live project demo of some of the other troubleshooting steps. Cool. So let's head into the next part of this troubleshooting, because I already have access. So that can't be the problem. So what can be the problem? The other problem is whether or not our knowledge base is actually ready. So go back into your side navigation panel, click knowledge base, and go back into the knowledge base that you created. So this is the knowledge base that I created at the start in step 1. And now let's check. Find the data sources section on your knowledge bases page. Okay, and is your knowledge base synced with your S3 bucket? Is it synced with the information that you're using? In step 1, we went through the whole effort of uploading a ton of documents into an S3 bucket, and we connected it into our knowledge base. But don't forget, there was one more thing we actually needed to do to finish the setup, which is to sync those two. If you don't sync your S3 bucket with your knowledge base, that information never actually gets transferred and processed by your knowledge base. Connecting it is simply like building a bridge between your S3 bucket and your knowledge base. Syncing is about letting the documents in your S3 bucket cross that bridge into your knowledge base. For now, we haven't actually synced our data. So we've just built a bridge and we left it hanging, and our data's not actually walking through that bridge. We need to actually sync it. So let's select our data source and select sync, okay, to start the syncing process. And a quick response to Ashuto here. Yeah, we are teaching about AWS Console, its features. We're using Amazon Bedrock today in S3, but there are lots of different other features that we're going through today in this project. So I'd highly recommend checking out the guide. You're gonna notice that it's not just about the console, it's also about APIs, it's also about the terminal and CLI commands. Cool, so we've done the sync now, sync complete. Good. Can we now see a response? Let's see. Okay, we're all synced, and we can now answer a quick question about what we just did to troubleshoot. Our chatbot initially failed to generate responses, so we went back into our knowledge base setup to sync our knowledge base knowledge base with the raw data stored in S3. This fixed the issue. I feel like I'm not supposed to say it fixed the issue when we haven't validated it yet. So shall we actually validate it first? Let's go back into our terminal, run it. Okay, so our API is running again, and let's reload the tab again to see if we get a response now. There we go, we got a response. So we have an answer to what is next work or who is next work, finally. And all just because we did two things. Select our data source, click sync. And that was the only thing that ended up, fixing our issue for us. So that was great. So this fixed our chatbot's failure because our knowledge base now has all the info it needs to answer our questions. Great. So let's head on over back to our project, and as you can see, we can see that we have an answer that's working in our solution, so we can take a screenshot of it and move on to the next secret mission. Amazing. So good. Okay, so we're now into the era of a new secret mission, which is about breaking down the web app. And congratulations, we can see that the backend API is now finally working. It connects your web app with your chatbot, and I think we're ticked off the data layer, we've ticked off the backend layer, and now we have the front-end layer coming up. Before we move into just running the full web app, the full solution, this secret mission is your chance to investigate the code that actually makes the entire solution work. How do you now connect the backend to the front end? How do those two work? So we're going to see how they come together to just create a functioning web app with a chatbot interface, what we're building today. Now I'm going to unlock the secret mission for us. And bam, we're here. Amazing. So let's go into our secret mission. And let's say in this secret mission, we're going to explore the main. Oh, and for everyone mentioning that it's zoomed in, please know that the full screen version of this project demo is available on YouTube. So I hope to see you there. So in this secret mission, we're going to explore the entire web app's code to understand how the different layers truly work together, i.e. the backend, frontend, and data layers. Great. So 3 components make up our web app. We've got the frontend, which is the part that you see and interact with. It displays the chatbot. It makes it look clean and easy to use. And we know that the frontend lives in 2 main places in your project directory. Okay, we talked about this a little bit earlier. We talked about how it lives inside the static folder, which is a style sheet called style.css, and the templates folder, which is index.html. So the frontend is really responsible for showing the chat interface. So it's responsible for showing this entire visual look of your web app. Okay, everything like this as well. So what's up with the backend? So that's the processing layer. We just went through a whole ordeal with the backend by looking into the main Python file and troubleshooting that. So this is the core API that talks to Amazon Bedrock, and we've got webapp.python. This Python file is a second version of the main Python file, except it also runs the front end. So webapp.python file, this one also runs all of the front end code that we see here. Now, lastly, we also have the data layer, and that's the knowledge base. We don't really see the code for the knowledge base here. It's all set up for us, in Amazon Bedrock. Now, the fun tip here is that, of course, you can actually create your knowledge base or the data layer somewhere else. But that somewhere else will involve a lot more code, maybe a lot more setup. Why? Because technically, you can create a vector store by yourself. You technically can create the AI model and the knowledge base and all of that infrastructure by yourself. But you'll end up having more code to pull all of this stuff together, whereas the knowledge base in Amazon Bedrock gives you a visual interface for creating that knowledge base, and connecting it is much easier too. So your data layer consists of the S3 bucket that stores the original documents, the knowledge base, which is the star of the data layer that actually processes and indexes the documents. And we also have the OpenSearch data store that stores the processed documents. Cool. So this is how they work together. We've got I'll move this here so it's easier to see. So we've got our front end that's here to pass questions from the user to the backend. The backend passes that question to the data layer. The data layer sends back the response. The backend is responsible for sending that response back to you, okay, over the front end. So now that we understand the general kind of structure of the web app, we're going to go into investigating our web app file, so this one here, to really see the difference between the web app file and also that main Python file that we set up initially. Cool beans. Okay. Now, if you were to look into web app, you can see that it also imports things. It does the same 4 things as our main Python file. It imports the tools, it loads the local information, it wakes up the API, and then it tells the API what to do. But it does all this in another level. look at all of the extra things it's now importing. There's more stuff that it's importing now, isn't it? So it also imports these 4 tools on top of what our main Python file was already importing. So these 4 tools are really helpful for our backend to actually load all of the web pages, like the HTML and the CSS files. It also helps with logging. So logging is about tracking errors, so that if you ever have anything that went wrong in your setup, logging is what helps you actually print out information about the error inside the terminal as well. So if you're using the logging tool, it means you're not only using the built-in errors that might come up, you can also custom write errors that you want to know about and show up in the terminal. We also have Jinja. I love this name. It's so cute. Jinja 2 templates are all about inserting Python code into your HTML file. So you are creating pages that changes based on data or user input. Okay, so that's true for us. You know, we have an entire chat with a chatbot. This needs to be using Jinja so that the Python information that's coming from the backend, from our knowledge base, can be translated into actual HTML code that we can see here. Okay, great. So we've learned a bit more about the extra stuff that we're importing. And now it's the actual app setup. So, oh, I just realized we have this app setup happen before we load the environment variables. That's okay. So this app setup is about setting up logging, and which helps us track everything that's happening in our app. Okay, so like we mentioned before, logging is about printing like the extra kind of error messages or things that you want to track. And in our case, we have some logging that we want to set up. And this is basically saying, hey, wake up. Like, just wake up the logger to say, when I'm running you, just make sure that you will be recording all of those error messages and special messages when I tell you to do so. And you can actually see logging at work later on. So you can go logger error. Okay, so if I run into this certain error, I want you to print this out. If I run into this error, I want you to print it out. If I run into this error, if I run into this error, can you print it out here? So we're basically telling logger, like, you're just responsible for printing out all different kinds of error messages when I tell you to do so. Okay, and then we have our environment variables that we're loading. And this is from line 28 onwards. So, actually line 26 onwards. So our environment variables over here, I'll move this back here so it's easier to have both running at the same time. So our environment variables look mostly the same, but you might notice we have one more thing we're importing, which is model ID. So this loads the model ID environment variable, and that environment variable tells Bedrock a model ID that we want to use for a special extra function. Okay, we're going to see what that function is in a second. Lastly is the static files and templates. So we've got our Python file saying things like, I should say, hold on. So from line 38 onwards, we have the lines for actually running the front end code. We didn't have this in the main Python file. We do now, which is why when we run the web app file, we can also see a front end. Okay, so we can see this in app.mount, static files, which is to serve the CSS and the JavaScript files, but in our case, it's just going to be the CSS file. And then we've got the templates here. That's all about serving the HTML file to us. Cool? So once that's done, oh, I just realized there is a duplicate there's a duplicate bullet point here that we don't need, so we can take that away. It's okay. So we have all of this code that's for loading static files and for loading the HTML file. And actually, if there's any question that you might have about these tools, you can always highlight them and press the Ask button to ask a question. So you can, for example, you can ask, so is the Jinja 2 templates library used to load the HTML file or the CSS file? Let's say you're confused about that. And you can see an answer from our Ask feature that says the Jinja 2 templates library is used to load the HTML file, not the CSS file. And it even tells you an explanation of what's happening here. So if you ever get confused, if you ever want more of an explanation, just know that you can just highlight, click Ask, and off you go. Ask your question, and it's going to give you an answer right in place. Great. So now that we know all of this extra information about our Python, about our new backend, let's talk about it here. The web app Python file extends the API by adding the ability to configure to also load the app's frontend. This includes the HTML file and CSS file. To load these files, it also needed to, what did it need to do? It also needed to import more tools and load a new environment variable, which was model ID. Nice. So add that in, and we'll move on to the next part, which is about the index.html file. Cool. Actually, before we move on, I thought it might be great for us to just quickly recap what we've learned so far about our new backend file. I'm just really sorry, my hair is like slightly messy, but we'll let it be. So our main Python file does 4 things. It imports more tools. It imports more tools here that helps us with loading the CSS file, the HTML file. It also adds logging, which we didn't have. It also loads another environment variable, the model ID. And it also actually serves the front-end files that we created as well in the repository. Okay, so the web app backend is a lot more powerful in those 4 ways. But what is the front end that we're serving? We're going to go investigate now by taking a look at index.html. So let's do a quick tour of index.html. It's our first time looking at it, and there's a bunch of code in here, but it's not intimidating, I promise you. So we're going to scroll all the way down to where our script says, where our HTML file says add JavaScript. So this is the script, or this is the code that actually creates the chat interface for us. Okay, crazy awesome code that's so practical for us, because this is how our web app is gonna even have a chat modal like this. Okay, so this chat modal is made possible by this JavaScript code. Think of this JavaScript code like a postal service. When you type a message and you press send, you press enter, it's like putting a letter in an envelope. And the code, this code here, sends that envelope to our API. So the API in web app, the Python file, it gets sent here. It gets sent there. When it gets a response back, it's like opening a reply letter, and then it displays the message and the response in the chat window. So it's basically responsible for putting the messages between you and your chatbot in kind of like this container or like this message, so that it's possible to display it inside the front end. So if you'd like to learn more about this code, we have a full breakdown here as well in the project guide. I highly recommend checking it out if you're feeling like you're up for the challenge, but just note this is definitely an extra for the experts. So don't feel too intimidated if it's new to you. Cool. So let's take a screenshot of the index.html file, and then we can move on to the final step of this project. Nice. So when you look at the index.html file we looked at, and also the web app Python file, here is like a quick recap of all the pieces and how they work together. So when you open the chat in your browser, Fast API is going to serve the index.html template to you. So it looks like this. This is the index.html file once it's loaded. And then the JavaScript code actually handles the chat interactions. All of this JavaScript code we see here handles what happens when you click chat with my projects. Oh, we should open a modal. Okay. And when you send a message, it goes, oh, I should package this message up into a little envelope so that it can get sent over to your AI, into your chatbot, or really the knowledge base in AWS, and I can get the response back to you, again, in another chat message. All right, so to recap that, when a user sends a chat message, the JavaScript code in index.html is responsible for packaging the message and sending it to our backend endpoint in webapp.py, which is the backend file. The endpoint fetches a response, and then passes it back to the front end where it's to render it. Okay, so secret mission accomplished, well done. That was a quick tour of kind of the connection between the front end and the back end so that you have a better understanding of how the web app works under the hood. So our finale for this project is to run the entire web app solution. I know I've been showing you this demo web app, but we haven't actually run it from scratch ourselves yet. We've just been referring to this demo web app as something to look at. So how can we get there ourselves? In this step, we will run the entire web app, including the front-end code. We're doing this to verify that we have a fully functional solution here. Cool. So to run the web app, we're going to go back to our terminal and we're going to press Control-C. Okay? And then we're going to run the command to start the Unicorn server, so the server for running the API. But this time, instead of running just the main file, we're going to run the actual web app Python file. You see, So before, when we had main there, we were saying, okay, can you run the main file? But now we're saying, no, don't run the main file. Let's run the web app file. So we're going to now run this file. Press enter. And here we go. It's now saying the unicorn, the web app is now running on this URL. So I'm going to copy that URL. I'm going to open a new tab, paste it, run it. Here we go. Okay, so this is exactly the web app that we've been showing throughout this entire demo, but now it should be showing up on your screen, on your own browser, which is going to be amazing, an amazing feeling when you see it happen. Cool. The difference between the API and the web app for the user is the visual experience. Instead of having to type in a direct API endpoint URL in the browser, the user is simply opening a web app link and sees a nice interface and chat modal. Nice. So with that, we have our web app open, and we can go down here to chat to select the chat with my projects button. Boom! Again, this is our JavaScript working. When we click on that, the fact that it opens up a modal and the fact that you can now chat, enter chat messages and see the chat like interactively, just new chat bubbles getting generated in front of you interactively, is JavaScript at work. So you can start by just saying hello. And here we go. We have the chatbot respond to us that it's ready to help. So what's happening here? It's actually just simply calling the API endpoint that we ran previously, and then it's just formatting the response to look very pretty in front of us. And now we can just ask it another question, like we asked our API endpoint. Who is Nextwork? Ooh, Nextwork is an organization, and it gives us a very, very similar response to what it gave us before. Okay, truly the only difference between these two is that we're now asking the same question over the web app instead of directly into the API. So what's happening in the background here is that the front end is going to catch what you type in here, and then it's going to generate, it's going to pass that text to the back end, who's going to then pass that question over to your knowledge base in the AWS environment. And yeah, the entire web app is now working. Woo! That's so good. Congratulations. So take a screenshot of the web app chat interface, and we're gonna put that into our documentation. Now we're going to experiment with a little feature that says talk to AI directly. So let's click on this, and let us ask again, who is Nextwork? What do you think is going to happen? So talk to AI directly is a checkbox that's a special little feature that helps us decide whether or not you want to use RAG or not. Checked, which means talking to the AI directly, means it will bypass the knowledge base and talk directly to the AI model. In this mode, the chatbot is just going to answer some questions based on its general knowledge. It's not going to even use your knowledge base's documents. But if you uncheck, which is the default, the chatbot will use RAG. The chatbot is actually going to go into your knowledge base to find the relevant information instead of trying to look for general knowledge. Okay? So unchecking it basically means we're just using the documents that we uploaded. Ticking it basically means AI model, can you just search through all of your knowledge, not just from this knowledge base, but all of your training data to generate your answer. But the sad thing about checking it is that it now ignores your entire knowledge base. So now it forgets all of the information that you already have. So if we send it, what's going to happen? Oh, no response yet. Yeah, we didn't get anything back, did we? Well, that's a bit strange. You can even take a screenshot of it if you want to keep it for your documentation. And then you're going to go into your terminal, and you're going to see, there was an error. 500 internal server error. So to help us diagnose what's going on, try copy the endpoint that's causing the error. And then we're going to head to the endpoint to try to resolve it. So this is the endpoint that's causing the error. Copy it and try put that to the end of your URL. Like this. Run it, and this is how you can troubleshoot. Oh, it's because there's something that's missing. It says model ID is not configured. Okay then, it looks like we need to configure something called model ID for this to work. Now to add model ID, don't forget, it was actually mentioned inside the web app Python file. Do you remember us talking about it when we went through the web app file? If you don't, that's okay. If you do, congratulations. It's exactly what we mentioned when we talked about how our main web app file is also importing another variable called model ID. This is the exact model ID that's now causing us some issues because we're trying to import it without actually setting it up yet. Okay, you know how to set up environment variables by now because we set up 3 together. So now let's set up the 4th one, model ID, like this. And to find a model ID, you can actually grab it from the line above it. The model ID is simply everything after the slash in the line above. The ARN is made up of the model ID, your region, and the service that you're using. And in our case, we're like, oh, that's good. That means the model ID's information is already in here. So let's save our changes and run the command for running our web app again. Okay, so we're going to restart the web app like this, running the same command. And let's go refresh our tab. Actually, you know what you can do if you want is refresh this this endpoint itself to see if it has the same error. Okay, no it doesn't. It doesn't have the same error. Our endpoint is working now. That's a great thing. Although it's so funny that it just gives us a whack-ass answer because it's no longer using our knowledge base. It's no longer using the information we set up. So because of that, the answer it gives on who is next work, something as simple as that, is not accurate at all. So let's talk to the AI directly. Who is next work? Ask our AI model. And yeah, it's quite directly, this one is an incredibly honest answer. It's my first time actually seeing it this honest. So I'm going to take a screenshot just for me to use this in the future. But my goodness, Nixon was not found as of my last update in April 2023. What does this prove to us? It proves to us that the moment that our chatbot is not using our knowledge base, it really struggles to answer basic questions that it technically should know as a chatbot that's an expert on your projects. That's the reason why RAG and setting up a knowledge base is so important. It gets your chatbot and your AI model to get to know your own information so that when you put it in your own app, it becomes an expert that can actually have smart conversations with your users. Cool. And yeah, actually, let me just take a screenshot again to record this funky response that was not very helpful and put that into our documentation. All right. Now let's reflect on this. The web app has the ability to switch between using RAG or going direct to the AI model. when we ask the same question, what is next work, directly to the AI model, it no longer uses the knowledge base and fails to give us a proper answer. All done. Congratulations, you successfully run your RAG chatbot web app and you chatted with it too. You've seen how the chatbot responds to questions based on your knowledge base when RAG is enabled. You know, when it's actually thinking, using the documents that we uploaded. So again, this is what it looks like when it's actually using our documents, using the knowledge base. Great answer. And you also see how it responds if it only used the AI model without using our knowledge base. Not great answer. So with that, you've really built a fully functional RAG chatbot from scratch that also lives inside a web app and is easy to use for your users. Congratulations. All right, so we're actually ready to wrap up now, and you can totally stop your project from here now that you've reached the finish line. Don't forget to delete your resources. But what I'm going to jump into now is the main secret mission of today, which is an optional step that customizes the look and feel of your web app. Let's jump straight into the secret mission and see what it's about. Cool. So, in this secret mission, we're going to customize the look and feel of our web app by creating our own front end. And I promise you, this is something you can do in about 5 to 10 minutes, so the secret mission won't take too much longer. By our own front end files. This will completely redesign the look of our web app while still using the same backend. So this is really going to show us just the power of being able to set up your web app over different kinds of files, separate files. We got our frontend and our backend in separate files, which is going to show us that even if you completely change index.html, if you keep your backend file the same, the connection between the frontend and backend is going to work the same. It's still going to be very strong. So this is a great way to practice how to use AI as well to create your own how do I say web app to create code as well. So I'm just going to open ChatGPT in a new tab here like this, and I'm going to put in our prompt for today. Oh, wrong tab, oops. Oh yeah, there we go. Here is the prompt that we're going to use today, and we're going to ask ChatGPT that we've attached the original index.html file along with the style.css that implements a chat application using API calls. I'd like you to generate a completely custom HTML frontend that uses the same API integration, gives us a new visual design, and is plug and play. Okay, so you can use the new frontend without changing anything in the backend. So please produce a complete self-contained HTML file that implements this new frontend. Very cool. And like we've mentioned, we need to attach the original file. So we're gonna right-click and say Save Link As, and save this index.html file. Same thing for the CSS file. And upload both from your downloads folder. So I'm going to upload index.html here. Going to upload style.css here. Nice. And once that's uploaded, we can go and let it generate the code. Now, off it goes, and while we wait for ChatGPT to generate the code, here's your reminder that the front end is all about displaying the look and feel of your web app. And whoa, this code is working fast. That's great. And we also have the backend code for processing requests from the front end. Cool. The reason why we can actually change the front end is because the front end and back end are loosely coupled. This is the technical term for saying they only communicate through the API you've set up in the web app file. All this to say, even if the index.html looks completely different, as long as we keep using the same API endpoints, the application will continue to work, which is so cool, isn't it? We want to experiment with customizing the front end because we want to personalize the web app. This is possible because as long as the API endpoints stay the same in index.html, the connection to the backend will still work, i.e. chat responses, so the last sentence that I put in here says, this is possible because as long as the API endpoints stay the same in the index.html file, the connection to the backend, which is like the sending of your chat message and the retrieving of your AI model's response, is still going to keep working too. So I'm going to select done and complete that. And yeah, you have two choices here. You can choose to wait for ChatGPT to finish generating your code. And to be honest, I have to say, I'm quite impressed that it seems to have already finished generating here. When I test ran this earlier, it took a bit longer than this. So pretty cool. Nice work, ChatGPT. Or you can also choose to see an example of a custom frontend that you could generate. Now you can always use this custom file as your backup option to see how index.html could look completely different. So this is an optional side quest that you can go on to generate a new way to look at your web app. And it's gonna look like this. It's gonna look so cute and kawaii, basically. And that's going to be kind of like the alternate universe version of your chat app. Okay, but for now, since our code is done generating, I'm just going to copy this code and add that to our index.html. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to open index.html in a code editor. So to find my index.html, I know that we've put our repository over inside our documents folder. So let's find it. It should be called nixwork-rag-webapp, and we put it inside the templates folder. So this is the index.html that we're actually running, and let's open it in our code editor. Okay, great work. So we have it. It looks good. And let's see how we can completely replace this. I've copied the code. I'm gonna select all of this code here. Actually, I'm gonna put this here so it's easier to look at. Okay, so I've copied the code. I'm gonna delete everything that currently exists in our index.html. Okay, I hope that's okay. And then I'm going to paste in the code that ChatGPT gave us. I'm going to save it. And once you're done, refresh the tab that's running your web app. Can you see a completely new index.html? Will it work? Let's see. Ta-da! Our front end completely changed. Absolutely changed it to something completely different. Can you still chat with it? Let's see. Hello. it can still chat with us. And it chats with us perfectly fine. We can even ask it a question. What is next work? And it even sends responses back to us exactly the same as our previous one, except it looks completely different. And all we did was change the index.html. So all we did was change that front-end experience, while the back-end experience, that logic and the processing and the data layer stayed the same. So everything functionality-wise is exactly the same. That's so much fun. Thank you so much, Plexidus, for mentioning that you can't wait to try this project for yourself. That's awesome. Great work. So let's take a screenshot of our new chat interface. Shout out ChatGPT for generating that so quickly for us. And let's give it a go. Let's mention our customized interface now features a focused chat app without a portfolio displayed. It uses a different color scheme, but we only had to change the index.html file. Everything else, every other file in the web app stayed the same. Whoop whoop, secret mission accomplished. Congratulations, you've just customized your web app interface as well. So that's a wrap for the entire project and all of the secret missions. We've made it. Congratulations. What the heck? Definitely one of the most built out projects we've ever done. So you should be so proud of yourself for making it here. And let's delete the resources that we created. The first thing we're going to delete is our knowledge base. So let's swim over to our knowledge base and select delete at the top there. Type delete, and notice this mention that the underlying vector store itself is not deleted yet. It's only the data that gets deleted. So you're still going to get charged for using a vector store until you delete that too. So once we delete our knowledge base, don't forget that we still need to delete the vector store, which is over here. Okay, and that's why we added it to the checklist as well. We also have our S3 bucket to delete, so let's go and delete everything that's inside the S3 bucket. Whoop. So when you're inside your S3 console, okay, this is your bucket. Don't forget to select everything and select delete like this, and then permanently delete it. All the objects inside. So these are these are the 10 files that you created. Let's delete them all. We don't need them anymore, although it was a lot of fun. And let's delete the bucket itself. So to delete the bucket itself, let's just click on, I wonder, can you delete it here? I'm always wondering whether it's possible to delete the bucket within this page, but I honestly have never gotten around to finding that option. I always have to go back to the main bucket tab, general purpose buckets, search for the bucket by its name, next look rag, documentation, initials, select delete, and delete it like this. Delete the bucket. Great. Next up, if you created new IAM access keys in order to do this project today, now's your time to delete those access keys. Now, this is not us. I didn't create new IAM access keys for this project, but in order to delete it, you would have to go all the way to the IAM console. And the reason why I didn't need to delete it is because I already have IAM access keys that I want to keep and continue using in my other projects. But if IAM access keys is not something you often use, you can delete it straight away. And I highly recommend that you delete it straight away. So you go into the IAM console, you select the Users tab here, and then you select Security Credentials over here. Once you selected it, you'll be able to find your access key. And let's say we have this one that I don't use anymore maybe. So I can go in Actions, select Delete, and delete it right away by just copying and pasting the ID that I'm using. All done. Last is our OpenSearch vector store. So this is the vector store that is still definitely going to charge you if you leave it running, even after you deleted your knowledge base. Slightly cheeky, isn't it? My screen was frozen. That was so scary. I was like, hold on a second. Am I frozen? Okay, but anyway, I don't think I'm frozen anymore. So I'm gonna go to the main screen for Open Search Service, and then you're gonna go down and find the collections page, and this is where you can select your collection. It's probably just like the one that's at the top. I have a lot here because I've created a lot of knowledge bases. I'm still gonna keep them for another project that I'm testing in the background, but I'm just gonna delete the specific one that I used. Awesome. Actually, I think there's a better way to figure out whether or not the collection is the most recent one. There should be a creation date. There we go. Yeah, sorry. To anyone that's also in the same shoes as me that might have lots of collections going, just find the one that has the creation date of the day that you're doing this project. Select that instead of like relying blindly on like the top result. Select that based on the creation date and then select delete. All done. Okay, so once that's deleted, you have your local virtual environment left. So we're gonna go back to our terminal. Over here, it's still running your web app, but really it's time to just close all of our resources and just say goodbye to this virtual environment. So we're gonna press Ctrl+C to close it. We're gonna run the command deactivate to deactivate it. Okay, and I'm just gonna clear my terminal so it's easier to see. And let's say we no longer need the clone repository files anymore. You can delete the repository folder using the command using this command, which is to remove the folder next to -rag-webapp. That's the name of the repository we cloned. Once it's done, you've removed it, so it's all gone. You can even double check by going into your Finder and double checking if it's there. Oh, is it there? It is there. Oh, I think I know why. Instead of going all the way into the folder itself, I should have been in the Documents folder. So you should be in your Documents folder, not inside the repository, and then deleting that folder. So now it's removed. Now you can't see it anymore. It's gone now because it's been properly deleted. So that's all of our resources deleted. Our local computer and the AWS environment should be wiped clear, like we've never done that project before. This is great to just make sure that everything that you've installed is not cluttering your project in the future, and you still have your documentation to keep and to refer to about what you've done today, so that's great. So since we're no longer using the AWS console, I'm gonna use this main tab to finish off our project today and generate our documentation. For some final reflection, let's talk about the services that we used today. Services we used in this project were Amazon, Bedrock. We also have, do you remember? We also used S3, Open Search Serverless as our vector store. What else? We used GitHub to clone our repository. Do we use any other service? Technically, we did use some tools within our web app, but if that's a bit complicated, that's okay. We don't need to mention it. And they're mentioned throughout other parts of our documentation too. But we technically also use IAM for our access to the AWS environment. Over the SDK. That was what we did. And technically the actual resource is called IAM access keys. Key concepts include the difference between a 3-tier web app and an API. What else did we do today? We also did a lot about tools that we imported. We also did a lot about, we also talked a little bit about, I would say like index.html and how that connects to the backend. So I'll just add that too. Whew, this was a bit of a chunky project today. Including demo time, this project did take us approximately 3 hours. The most challenging part, I would say, was troubleshooting. Would you say that's the most challenging part? Maybe. Troubleshooting the API through multiple rounds of errors. Maybe. But this is up to you. What was most challenging for you? Understanding the front end, I would say, is actually pretty challenging because we had to go through that in a pretty concise way. And really, sometimes it feels like things are straight magic. When really, when you open the code, you're like, oh, it's very logical. It's not magic. And sometimes when it's logical, it feels even more cool because you're like, oh, I really get how it works now. It was most rewarding to generate our own front end for the same app while keeping the back end. Next up, why did we do this project today? We did this project today as the grand finale of our RAG x Bedrock chatbot series. This was a great experience for learning how you can bring a resource you've set up within AWS, which in our case is a RAG chatbot, into a web app, and really it's production ready, into a web app that other users can use. So cool. Super practical experience. So that was a great reflection, and that's a wrap for today's project. Well done. You've built a very powerful RAG chatbot web app using Amazon Bedrock today. You've learned how to set up and configure AWS services. You worked with AI and RAG, you definitely did. And you also built a whole ass web app. That was crazy. So congratulations on completing everything in this project today. Just as a reminder, if this is feeling like, oh wow, there was so much going on, just know that it was also because we decided to take on all of the secret missions that the project comes with. So if you want and to do like a smaller condensed version of today's project, you can always choose to skip the secret missions and do the core parts of running the web app and then making sure that the backend is connected to your knowledge base. So super up to you. I think the secret missions are so worthwhile and looks great on your documentation as well. So let's download our documentation. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a dark mode of my documentation because I love dark mode documentation, and I'm gonna save it in my portfolio. Up it goes, up it goes. While it generates that, oh, I think it's already saved. It's almost like it heard me. So it's saved in my portfolio now. We can go up and check it out. It's in our portfolio, which looks really good. Ooh, dark mode screenshots on a dark mode project guide looks sleek. That looks amazing. Wow, look at all the stuff that you've talked about. Breaking down the API, setting up the API, testing the API, troubleshooting it, running it, breaking it down, the web app, customizing the front end. Unbelievable. Look at all this amazing stuff you've done today. What? That's so cool. Next up, you know what? I want to save it in light mode as well, and I want to save it as a PDF. And let's say you also want to add your LinkedIn profile's URL. So if that's you, that's a bit of you. You can also add your LinkedIn profile's URL into your documentation, and I want to save this as a PDF. So I'm going to save it like this. And while that's downloading, I'm also going to create the LinkedIn post that is going to accompany my documentation today. So here's the LinkedIn post. I wanted an AI that actually understands my documents, so I built one. Here's how I did it, and a quick summary of everything that you've done below. And great stuff. You can also add the document that you've downloaded. So let's put that, upload that from our downloads. Let's title it as documentation. And this is what the document looks like. Ta-da! It even has the link to your LinkedIn URL here because we added that just now. And it looks quite beautiful. Look at light mode doing its job. Ooh, light mode is also a vibe. What do you like more, dark mode or light mode? Well, I can't decide. Light mode looks really good for all of the screenshots with the white background. Dark mode looks really good for all the screenshots with the dark background. So I'm almost thinking next time I do a project, I want all my screenshots to be a certain color theme, either light mode or dark mode, and then my documentation to follow that color theme too. So it looks really slick. But this is your LinkedIn post alongside your documentation, and that looks amazing. And then you can select post, all done. Oh, good. So thank you very much for joining me in today's project. You have now completed it. You should be so proud of yourself. I know I'm proud of myself for doing this. So I hope you're super proud of yourself too. All right, so from the Nextwork team, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us in this project, and we can't wait to see you in the next one. Well done on wrapping up the entire RAG chatbot with Amazon Bedrock series. Such a funky name. And a big shout out to everyone that made this live so much fun. Big shout out to Plexides. Big shout out to Ariana. Big shout out to Erwin as well. You guys are the best. Awesome. See you next time.